I need to tell you something that happened to me 15 days ago. That's going to sound absolutely impossible, but I swear on everything I hold sacred that every word is true. I was sitting alone in a candlelit monastery library in Northern California at 40A. Am completely fascinated and troubled by the mystery of what actually happens to our souls during sleep. When God the Father appeared beside me and revealed his astounding truth about the spiritual realm we enter every night that will revolutionize everything you think you know about rest, dreams, and the incredible journey your soul takes while your body sleeps. What he showed me didn't just satisfy my curiosity about sleep. It completely transformed my understanding of why we need rest, what happens during dreams, and the amazing spiritual activities our souls engage in during the hours when our consciousness seems to disappear, giving me access to insights about the nature of human existence that are more mind-blowing than anything I'd ever imagined about the mystery of sleep. But before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now, let's get into my story. I'm recording this from a peaceful riverside park in Sacramento, where I'm taking a lunch break between sessions at a Christian health and wellness conference about the intersection of physical and spiritual well-being. It's a beautiful Thursday afternoon, and I'm sitting on a wooden bench under a massive oak tree, watching the American River flow gently past, while families enjoy picnics and joggers follow the tree-lined path. The California sunshine is filtering through the leaves above me, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow, and there's something about the rhythm of flowing water that makes you think about the mysteries of life and rest. I should be reviewing my notes for this afternoon's presentation about spiritual practices for better sleep, but I can't focus on anything except what God revealed to me about what happens during sleep that has completely astounded me, with the realization that every night our souls embark on the most incredible spiritual journey imaginable. Let me tell you about the fascination that brought me to my breaking point 15 days ago. For weeks leading up to that night in the monastery library, I had been consumed by questions about the nature of sleep that went far beyond simple curiosity. I was genuinely troubled by the mystery of what happens to our consciousness, our souls, and our spiritual existence during the hours when we seem to disappear from awareness. It started during a particularly challenging period of insomnia that followed an intensive filming schedule for The Chosen. We had been working 18-hour days for weeks, and my sleep patterns had become completely disrupted. Instead of simply being tired, I found myself lying awake, night after night, fascinated and somewhat disturbed by the mystery of what sleep actually was and why it was necessary for human existence. The specific trigger was a conversation with a neuroscientist who had been consulting on a documentary about consciousness and the brain. During our discussion about the portrayal of spiritual experiences in The Chosen, he made observations that exposed how little we actually understand about what happens to consciousness during sleep. "Jonathan," he said, with the kind of scientific precision that both illuminates and humbles, "we know a lot about what happens to the brain during sleep, the neural patterns, the hormone releases, the memory consolidation. But we have no idea what happens to consciousness itself. Where does your awareness go for 8 hours every night? What is the nature of the self that experiences dreams? Why do we sometimes receive profound insights or spiritual experiences during sleep that we never have while awake?" His questions hit me like intellectual lightning because they exposed something I'd never really considered. Sleep wasn't just physical rest, but some kind of mysterious transition into a completely different state of existence that we experienced every single night without understanding what it actually was. That night in my hotel room, I began examining sleep with a level of curiosity and concern I'd never brought to the subject before. As a believer, I knew that God had designed sleep as part of human existence, but I couldn't understand why a loving God would create a system where his children essentially disappeared from consciousness for a third of their lives. If we were created for relationship with God, Why did he design us to spend 8 hours every day in a state where we couldn't pray, worship, serve, or consciously commune with him? If our purpose was to love and serve others, why did we need to become unconscious and unavailable for a third of our existence? If life was precious and time was limited, why did God require us to spend so much of it in what seemed like temporary death? But what troubled me even more were the spiritual questions about dreams, spiritual experiences during sleep, and the nature of consciousness itself. I had experienced profound dreams that felt more real than waking life, received insights during sleep that transformed my understanding of Scripture, and had spiritual encounters during the night that seemed to come from God but happened while I was unconscious. How could God communicate with me while I was asleep if sleep was just unconsciousness? What was the nature of the self that experienced dreams if the brain was supposed to be resting? Why did some of my most significant spiritual experiences happen during sleep rather than during conscious prayer and worship? I began researching everything I could find about sleep from both scientific and spiritual perspectives, but instead of answers, I found only more questions. Scientists could describe the mechanics of sleep, but couldn't explain consciousness. Theologians could discuss rest as a gift from God, but couldn't explain what happened to the soul during sleep. The mystery became consuming. Every night as I lay down to sleep, I became acutely aware that I was about to enter a state of existence that I didn't understand, engage in experiences I couldn't control, and spend hours in a realm that seemed to exist somewhere between life and death, consciousness and unconsciousness, the physical and the spiritual. The crisis deepened during our filming of scenes where Jesus talks about rest, about God giving sleep to his beloved, about the peace that comes from trusting the Father with our lives during vulnerable hours of unconsciousness. Every word I spoke felt hollow because I didn't understand what I was representing about the nature of rest and what God intended sleep to accomplish. After one particularly beautiful scene where Jesus speaks about the Father watching over his children while they sleep, Dallas Jenkins pulled me aside with a thoughtful expression. "Jonathan, your performance was technically excellent, but something felt questioning, like you were delivering comforting words about sleep and rest while personally struggling with questions about what sleep actually is. Is there something about rest that's been troubling you?" His observation confirmed what I'd been feeling. My questions about the nature of sleep were affecting my ability to authentically represent the peace and trust that Jesus taught about rest. That night in my trailer, I had what can only be described as an existential crisis about the mystery of sleep and what it meant for human existence and spiritual life. "God," I prayed in desperation, "I need to understand what happens during sleep. I need to know what you intended when you designed us to spend a third of our lives unconscious. I need to understand what happens to our souls, our consciousness, our spiritual existence during the hours when we seem to disappear from awareness." 3 days later, I made an impulsive decision to take a week off from filming and drive to a Benedictine monastery in Northern California where I could seek God in silence about the mystery of sleep. Something in my spirit was crying out for understanding about this fundamental aspect of human existence that everyone experienced but no one seemed to truly comprehend. I had heard about a monastery in the hills north of San Francisco where monks had been practicing contemplative prayer for centuries, including special attention to the spiritual dimensions of rest and the rhythm of waking and sleeping. The ancient wisdom of monastic life seemed like the perfect place to explore questions about sleep that went beyond science and psychology. For 4 days, I participated in the monastery's schedule of prayer, work, and study, including their practice of rising for prayer during the night hours. I spoke with monks who had been observing their own sleep patterns and spiritual experiences for decades, hoping their wisdom would illuminate the mystery that had been consuming my thoughts. But instead of answers, I found that even these devoted men of God were fascinated by the same questions I was asking. They could speak about the spiritual discipline of rest and the importance of trusting God during vulnerable hours, but they were equally mystified by what actually happened to consciousness and the soul during sleep. On my 5th night at the monastery, I couldn't sleep despite my exhaustion from days of seeking understanding. Around 3:30 a.m., I left my simple guest room and wandered into the monastery's library, a beautiful space filled with centuries of spiritual wisdom and lit only by candles and soft reading lamps. I found myself drawn to a section of books about mysticism, contemplation, and the nature of spiritual experience. But as I sat, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of generations of seekers, I felt overwhelmed by the realization that the mystery of sleep remained largely unexplored even in the deepest spiritual traditions. That's when I did something I'd never done before. Instead of asking God to give me restful sleep, I asked Him directly to reveal what actually happens during sleep. "Father," I said aloud in that quiet library, my voice barely above a whisper among the ancient books, "I need you to show me what happens during sleep. I need to understand what you intended when you designed us to spend a third of our lives in this mysterious state. I need to know what happens to our souls, our consciousness, our spiritual existence during the hours when we seem to disappear from the physical world." The library was silent except for the distant sounds of the monastery settling into the deep night hours and the gentle flicker of candles casting dancing shadows on the book-lined walls. I felt like I was sitting at the intersection of curiosity and reverence, desperately needing someone to unveil one of the most fundamental mysteries of human existence. "I don't understand why you would create us for relationship with you and then design us to spend 8 hours every day, unconscious and unable to commune with you," I continued, my voice filled with genuine puzzlement rather than complaint. "I don't understand what dreams are, why some of my most profound spiritual experiences happen while I'm asleep, or what the purpose is of this daily journey into unconsciousness that every human being must take." The silence that followed felt different from ordinary quiet. It felt pregnant with mystery, about to be unveiled, like the moment before dawn, when the deepest secrets of night are about to be revealed by light. I had moved beyond simply wondering about sleep to asking for revelation about one of the most universal yet mysterious aspects of human existence. "If there's a spiritual purpose to sleep," I whispered, voicing the fascination that had been consuming my thoughts, "if our souls engage in activities during these hours that we don't understand, if there's a realm we enter every night that's more significant than we realize, then I need you to show me what it is, because I feel like I'm missing something fundamental about human existence itself." What I didn't know was that my honest question about what happens during sleep was about to be answered in the most astounding way imaginable. Because at exactly 4:17 a.m., the atmosphere in that candlelit monastery library began to shift in ways that would transform my understanding of sleep and give me access to truths about the spiritual journey our souls take every night that are more incredible than anything I'd ever imagined about the mystery of rest. The air became thicker, more alive, charged with a presence so full of divine wisdom that my questions about sleep began to feel like the beginning of an amazing discovery rather than an unsolvable mystery. The temperature didn't change, but reality itself felt more expansive, as if I was about to receive something that would revolutionize not just my understanding of sleep, but my entire comprehension of human existence. And then, sitting in the leather chair across from me as naturally as if he had been reading in the library all along, was God the Father. His presence filled that quiet space with such overwhelming sense of cosmic wisdom that my questions about sleep seemed suddenly like the most natural inquiries in the world. He was looking at me with eyes that held both infinite knowledge about the mysteries of existence and absolute delight in sharing those mysteries with his children. "Jonathan," he said, his voice carrying both the authority of divine wisdom and the warmth of a father, excited to share amazing secrets with his beloved child. "Thank you for asking about one of the most beautiful gifts I've given humanity. Now I can show you what really happens during sleep. And I promise you, the truth will astound you, because the spiritual journey your soul takes every night is more incredible than anything you've ever imagined about the nature of rest and dreams." God settled into that library chair, and his presence transformed the candlelit space into what felt like the most incredible classroom about the mysteries of human existence. The questions about sleep that had been consuming my thoughts began to feel like the beginning of the most amazing discovery rather than an unsolvable puzzle. "The first truth about what happens during sleep," he began, his voice filled with the kind of delighted wisdom that comes from sharing the most wonderful secrets of creation, is that sleep isn't unconsciousness. It's a transition into a different kind of consciousness. When your physical body rests, your soul becomes more active, not less active. Sleep is when your spirit is freed from the limitations of physical awareness to engage in spiritual activities that are impossible while you're awake. I felt something fundamental shifting in my understanding as he continued. Every night when you fall asleep, your soul steps into the spiritual realm while remaining connected to your physical body by what you might think of as a silver cord of life. You don't disappear during sleep, you expand. You don't become unconscious, you become differently conscious, aware of spiritual realities that are normally filtered out by physical senses. This was already revolutionizing everything I thought I knew about the nature of sleep and consciousness. The second truth about sleep, God said, his eyes beginning to shine with divine joy, is that it's when your soul comes home to me for nightly restoration and communion. While your mind rests from the concerns of physical existence, your spirit soars into my presence for direct fellowship that's unfiltered by the distractions and limitations of earthly awareness. This was mind-blowing. Sleep wasn't time away from God, it was time of intimate communion with God. When you pray before sleeping and feel my peace wash over you, he explained with infinite tenderness, that's not just psychological comfort. That's your soul recognizing that it's about to return to its true home for hours of uninterrupted fellowship with me. The peace you feel before sleep is your spirit's anticipation of coming into my direct presence. The third truth went even deeper. During sleep, your soul engages in what I call heavenly maintenance, spiritual restoration, emotional healing, memory processing, and character development that can only happen when the ego and physical mind step aside. Your soul sorts through the experiences of the day, heals from emotional wounds, integrates new learning, and prepares for the challenges ahead. I thought about how different I often felt after a good night's sleep, not just physically rested, but emotionally renewed and spiritually refreshed in ways that went beyond simple physical recovery. The dreams you dismiss as random brain activity, he continued with gentle amusement, are actually your soul's experiences in the spiritual realm being translated into images and stories your physical mind can process when you wake up. Dreams are spiritual experiences filtered through physical consciousness, not meaningless neural static. The fourth truth was astounding. During sleep, your soul travels to what I call the learning realm's spiritual dimensions, where you receive instruction, wisdom, and preparation for your earthly mission that would be impossible to receive while your physical mind is active and filtering everything through earthly concerns. This was completely reframing what I thought happened during the hours of sleep. Some of your most profound insights, creative inspirations, and spiritual revelations come through these nightly visits to the learning realms, he explained. When you wake up with sudden understanding of a problem, new perspective on a relationship, or inspiration for your work, those aren't random thoughts, they're gifts from your nightly spiritual education. The fifth truth shocked me completely. During deep sleep, your soul sometimes serves as a messenger and healer in the spiritual realm, carrying love, prayers, and healing energy to other souls who need what you have to offer. You're not just receiving during sleep, you're also giving, serving, and ministering in ways your physical consciousness never knows about. God stood up and walked to one of the tall windows where the first hints of dawn were beginning to appear beyond the monastery grounds. Some nights, your soul visits people you love who are struggling, offering comfort and encouragement in the spiritual realm that they experience as sudden peace, hope, or the sense that someone cares about them. Other nights, your soul joins with other believers in what you might call prayer missions, carrying intercession to places and people who need spiritual intervention. This was incredible. Sleep wasn't passive rest, it was active spiritual service. The sixth truth about sleep, he said, returning to his chair, is that it's when your soul receives downloads of divine wisdom, prophetic insight, and revelatory understanding that prepare you for future challenges and opportunities. What you call intuition or spiritual discernment is often the result of nightly briefings your soul receives during sleep. I realized how many times I'd awakened with inexplicable knowledge about situations, people, or decisions that I couldn't have figured out through conscious reasoning. The seventh truth about sleep is that it's when your soul processes and releases spiritual toxins, unforgiveness, fear, anger, shame, that would poison your spirit if they accumulated without regular cleansing. Sleep is spiritual detoxification as much as physical restoration. This explained why sleep was so healing emotionally, not just physically. It wasn't just psychological recovery, it was spiritual purification. When you wake up feeling emotionally lighter after processing difficult experiences through dreams, he continued, that's because your soul has been through a spiritual washing that cleanses away the emotional residue of painful experiences, leaving you free to face new days without carrying the full weight of yesterday's hurts. The eighth truth revolutionized my understanding of divine communication. Sleep is when I can speak to your soul most clearly because the noise of physical existence and the resistance of the conscious mind are set aside. Many of the most important communications I want to give my children come through dreams, night visions, and the deep knowing that emerges during sleep. I thought about biblical accounts of God speaking through dreams and wondered how many divine communications I might have missed by dismissing sleep experiences as mere dreams. The ninth truth about sleep, God said, his voice becoming more intense with wonder, is that it's when your soul rehearses for eternity. The experiences you have during deep sleep, the sense of timelessness, the spiritual fellowship, the freedom from physical limitations, are previews of what eternal life will be like when your soul is permanently freed from the constraints of physical existence. This was breathtaking. Sleep was practice for heaven. When you experience that deep, peaceful sleep, where you lose all sense of time and wake up feeling like you've been somewhere wonderful that you can't quite remember, he explained, your soul has been experiencing the kind of existence you'll have in eternity, timeless, peaceful, completely connected to me, and free from all earthly concerns. The 10th and final truth was the most astounding of all. Sleep is one of the greatest gifts I've given humanity because it ensures that no matter how difficult, painful, or disconnected your earthly existence becomes, you return to me every single night for restoration, communion, and renewal. Sleep guarantees that you never go more than 16 hours without coming home to my presence. God reached out and touched my heart, and suddenly I could sense the spiritual activity that was constantly happening during sleep. Souls traveling, learning, serving, healing, communing with the divine in ways that made sleep one of the most spiritually active times of human existence. Jonathan, he said with such love and excitement that I felt my entire understanding of human existence being transformed. You haven't been disappearing for a third of your life. You've been living a third of your life in the spiritual realm where your soul is most truly itself. Sleep isn't time away from spiritual life. It's when spiritual life is most pure and unhindered. The library fell silent as this revelation began to transform my understanding of rest, consciousness, and the incredible spiritual journey that every human being takes every single night. I wasn't just hearing words, I was experiencing the reality of divine wisdom about one of the most universal yet mysterious aspects of human existence. But why don't we remember these experiences? I asked, still trying to understand how such incredible spiritual activity could happen without conscious awareness. Why does it feel like unconsciousness rather than the most spiritually active time of our existence? God smiled with the warmth of someone who is about to give me the most wonderful explanation, because if you remembered everything your soul experiences during sleep, you would never want to wake up. The spiritual realm is so beautiful, so peaceful, so fulfilling that physical existence would feel like prison rather than opportunity. I veil the memories of sleep so you can fully engage with earthly life while still receiving the benefits of nightly spiritual restoration. He gestured around the peaceful library where we were having this conversation. But sometimes I allow glimpses through dreams, through the peace you feel upon waking, through sudden insights that seem to come from nowhere. These are gifts from your soul's nightly journey, reminders that there's far more to your existence than what happens during waking hours. As God began to fade slightly, signaling our conversation was nearing its end, he left me with the most astounding truth of all. Jonathan, every night when you lay your head on your pillow, you're not just going to sleep, you're returning home to me for fellowship, restoration, learning, and service that will prepare you for whatever earthly challenges await. Sleep isn't escape from life, it's engagement with the deepest life possible. His final words came with the authority of divine love. Remember this revelation. There are millions of my children who see sleep as lost time, who resist rest because they think it's unproductive, who don't understand that their nightly journey into the spiritual realm is one of the most important parts of their existence. They need to know that sleep is gift, not lost spiritual activity, not spiritual absence. As God's presence began to fade from that monastery library, I felt like someone who had been viewing sleep as lost time and had suddenly discovered it was the most spiritually active part of my existence. The questions about sleep that had been troubling my mind for weeks were completely answered, replaced by a profound sense of awe about the incredible spiritual journey my soul was taking every single night. "Thank you," I whispered as his form became translucent in the growing dawn light, filtering through the library windows. "Thank you for showing me that sleep isn't unconsciousness, it's the most pure spiritual consciousness possible." His final words came with the gentle authority of infinite wisdom. "Remember this wonder, Jonathan. Every person who sees you approaching sleep with anticipation instead of resignation will want to know how that perspective is possible. Your transformation from viewing sleep as lost time to understanding it as spiritual adventure will become their invitation to discover the same awe about their nightly journey home to me." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in that candlelit library with the most astounding understanding of sleep I had ever received. But this wasn't just fascinating information, it was a complete transformation of how I approached rest, dreams, and the rhythm of daily existence. The first thing I did was something I'd never done before. I thanked God for every hour of sleep I'd ever experienced, recognizing that each night had been an opportunity for spiritual communion, learning, and service that I'd never understood or appreciated. For an hour, I sat in that library and marveled at the thousands of nights I'd spent in spiritual realms, receiving divine restoration and engaging in heavenly activities while thinking I was simply unconscious. This wasn't just intellectual appreciation, it was profound gratitude for a gift I'd been receiving every night of my life without recognizing its incredible value. When I left the monastery that morning, the transformation was immediately evident in how I approached sleep, rest, and the rhythm of waking and sleeping. Bedtime became something I looked forward to rather than something I merely submitted to. Sleep became spiritual adventure rather than necessary unconsciousness. Dreams became communications from God rather than random mental activity. The change was dramatic when I called my wife that evening to share what had happened in the monastery library. "Jonathan," she said with obvious amazement, "you sound completely different when you talk about sleep. There's something in your voice, excitement, anticipation. It's like you've discovered something wonderful about rest that you never knew before." I shared my encounter with God about what happens during sleep, his astounding revelation that souls engage in spiritual activities while bodies rest, the complete transformation of my understanding from viewing sleep as lost time to seeing it as spiritual homecoming. "That explains so much," she said with growing wonder. "I've always felt like sleep was more than just physical rest, but I never imagined our souls were actually traveling and learning and serving while we slept. This changes everything about how I'll approach bedtime." When I returned to the Chosen, set 3 days later, the change was immediately evident to everyone who knew me. My entire approach to the physical demands of filming had shifted from anxiety about getting enough rest to confidence that sleep would provide exactly the spiritual restoration I needed. Elizabeth Tabish was the first to comment. "Jonathan, something's different about your energy lately. You seem more peaceful about rest, like you're not fighting sleep or worried about losing time when you rest. What happened at the monastery?" I shared my encounter with God. about what happens during sleep, his revolutionary revelation that sleep is when souls come home for communion with him, the complete transformation of my relationship with rest from viewing it as unconsciousness to understanding it as spiritual activity. I've always struggled with feeling guilty about needing so much sleep, she said with obvious relief. What you're describing sounds like permission to see rest as spiritually productive rather than just physically necessary. That's revolutionary. George Xanthus overheard our conversation and joined with his own recognition. I've been fascinated by dreams and the sense that something important happens during sleep, but I never imagined our souls were actually traveling to spiritual realms and learning from God. This explains why I sometimes wake up with insights I never could have figured out consciously. When we began filming later that week, the transformation was profound. We were shooting scenes where Jesus talks about rest, about God giving sleep to his beloved, about the peace that comes from trusting the Father during vulnerable hours. That's the most authentic portrayal of someone at peace with rest I've ever seen, Dallas said after we wrapped a particularly beautiful scene. It didn't look like someone just talking about the importance of sleep. It looked like someone who genuinely understands that rest is spiritual adventure rather than spiritual absence. The revolution in my understanding wasn't just affecting my professional work, it was transforming every aspect of my relationship with sleep and daily rhythm. I began preparing for sleep like preparing for worship, approaching bedtime with anticipation rather than resignation, treating dreams as potential communications from God rather than random mental noise. 2 weeks after my encounter with God, I received an invitation that demonstrated how quickly spiritual transformation affects ministry opportunities. A major Christian health conference asked me to speak specifically about the spiritual dimensions of sleep and rest. "Jonathan," said the conference director during our planning call, "there's something different about how you talk about sleep lately. You sound like someone who's discovered something amazing about rest that most people never understand. We want you to share whatever you've learned about the spiritual significance of sleep." The speaking engagement became one of the most fascinating presentations I'd ever given, not because of scientific expertise or medical knowledge, but because I was sharing from fresh revelation about the spiritual realities of sleep that transformed how people understood rest. 15 days ago, I told the audience of 800 healthcare professionals and ministry leaders I was troubled by the mystery of what happens during sleep, viewing it as lost time when we're unconscious and unable to commune with God. But then he astounded me by revealing that sleep is when our souls come home to him for the most pure spiritual fellowship possible. The response was overwhelming. During the question period, dozens of people shared their own experiences with meaningful dreams, peaceful rest, and the sense that something important happened during sleep that they'd never understood. "I've been treating sleep as a necessary evil that takes time away from productive life," said Dr. Sarah Martinez, a physician specializing in sleep disorders. "What you've shared today about sleep being spiritual adventure, that's revolutionized my understanding of why rest is so essential for human well-being." Pastor Michael Chen was moved to tears. "I've been feeling guilty about needing 8 hours of sleep when I could be praying or studying scripture. Your revelation that sleep is actually time of intimate communion with God, that's transformed my entire relationship with rest." 3 months after my encounter with God, word had spread throughout the Christian community about my transformation from viewing sleep as unconsciousness to understanding it as spiritual journey. I began receiving invitations from churches, retreat centers, and wellness organizations specifically focused on helping people develop healthier relationships with rest and sleep. "Jonathan," said Dr. Patricia Williams, who directed a Christian counseling center, "your message about the spiritual dimensions of sleep is exactly what our clients need to hear. So many people struggle with sleep, anxiety, insomnia, or guilt about resting because they don't understand that sleep is spiritually productive rather than spiritually absent." These speaking opportunities led to developing a comprehensive teaching ministry focused on helping Christians understand that rest is spiritual discipline rather than spiritual laziness, and that sleep is opportunity for divine communion rather than time away from God. 6 months after my encounter with God, the transformation was evident in every aspect of my approach to health, rest, and the rhythm of daily life. I had developed what I can only describe as a theology of sleep that honored rest as spiritual practice and viewed dreams as potential communications from God. My sleep quality improved dramatically because I approached bedtime with peaceful anticipation rather than anxious resignation. Most remarkably, I began experiencing dreams and sleep insights that were clearly connected to my work, relationships, and spiritual growth. Instead of dismissing these as random brain activity, I treated them as potential guidance for my nightly spiritual education. 1 year after my encounter with God, I received feedback that demonstrated the ripple effect of understanding sleep correctly. A seminary professor wrote to share that my presentation about the spiritual dimensions of sleep had completely changed how he taught about rest and Sabbath. I was teaching students that rest was simply physical recovery, he wrote, when I should have been helping them understand that rest is spiritual restoration. Your revelation about souls traveling to learning realms during sleep has revolutionized how I help future pastors understand the importance of modeling healthy rest for their congregations. But the most profound validation came during a conversation with Brother Thomas, one of the monks at the monastery where I'd received this revelation. "Jonathan," he said with obvious joy, "what you've shared about the spiritual activities of sleep aligns perfectly with what the contemplative tradition has always sensed but rarely articulated clearly. You've given language to the mystery that we've been living but struggling to explain." Now, sitting here by this peaceful Sacramento River watching the afternoon light dance on the water, almost 2 years after my encounter with God about what happens during sleep, I regularly speak to audiences around the world about honoring rest as spiritual discipline and understanding sleep as divine gift rather than necessary evil. The truths God shared in that monastery library have become the foundation for everything I teach about rest, spiritual rhythm, and the incredible journey our souls take every night. Maybe you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story. Maybe you've been viewing sleep as lost time, feeling guilty about needing rest, or struggling with the sense that the hours spent sleeping are somehow less valuable than the hours spent awake and productive. Maybe you've been dismissing dreams as meaningless, fighting sleep because it feels unproductive, or anxious about the time spent in what you thought was unconsciousness. Maybe you've never considered that rest could be spiritual discipline, or that sleep could be opportunity for divine communion. I want you to know that what God revealed about what happens during sleep will astound you because it transforms every night from lost time into spiritual adventure. You're not disappearing for a third of your life, you're living the most spiritually active part of your existence. The 10 truths God taught me about what happens during sleep have the power to transform any anxiety about rest into anticipation about spiritual journey. First, sleep isn't unconsciousness, it's transition into different consciousness where your soul engages in spiritual activities impossible while awake. Second, sleep is when your soul comes